What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. Today we'll be diving into the new motion comic titled Spearhead, which is a direct continuation of Yunara's scenes from the season cinematic. This takes place shortly after the events of last year, so here's a little reminder. In 2025 we saw Shin return to Ionia. There he met the Kinku and helped them protect the Dark Enclave from LeBlanc and Atakan. But to do so he had to sacrifice his own life, giving his body to Zahen. Now we're going to see the aftermath of this sacrifice through the perspective of Yunara. In the cinematic, she was running from whatever these creatures are before being saved by Jarvan IV. Her part in the cinematic ends with her showing Shin's spear to Jarvan. At the start of the comic we learn why Yunara is in Demacia. She's there to honor Shin, to return his spear to the kingdom he loved. But Shin did not just sacrifice himself to save the world. There's also the part where his body now belongs to a Darkin, Zahen, and Yunara intends to keep that to herself. Also according to her, Zahen walked away in silence. Now we know Zahen's goal remains the same, to defeat the other Darkin, so we can assume that's what he's trying to do right now. As for Yunara, she received some new voice lines at the end of last year, suggesting that she wanted to find the aspect of Twilight. But with Shin having made such an important sacrifice, it makes sense for her to honor him first before proceeding with that goal. Yunara says Shin called Jarvan family, which makes sense. In case you didn't know, Shin arrived in Jarvan's life when he was just a little kid, and it was him who trained Jarvan. In the next page we get a couple lines of Yunara describing what she heard of Demacia and Petricite. As I said, I'm not expecting major reveals this season. This will likely be mostly an introduction to Demacia for new fans, so it makes sense for the first story this year to be told from the perspective of someone who had never been in the kingdom before. And speaking of Petricite, the next page has Yunara comparing Ionia to Demacia. How the former is never still, the air itself filled with motion, while in the latter, the breeze seems to hold its breath. Here both describe how each region deals with magic, Ionia being full of it, while in the capital of Demacia, magic is quite rare. But this description she gives is also reflected in the people and culture. Ionia is more wild and free, while Demacia is more rigid, structured. Here we have a small comparison between a Silverwing and Zahen. Zahen's story did hint that his ascended form was based on a Silverwing, and here we get a solid confirmation that that was indeed the case. And again, Yunara mentions that Zahen walked away. The next page takes place in the Hall of Valor, where we can find the throne of Demacia. Jarvan presents Yunara to his father and tells him that Shin is gone. Here he refers to Shin as uncle, a reminder that King Jarvan III and Zhao were very close friends. I really love the king's reaction here and Yunara's lines. You can feel the pain of his loss in his expression. Shin wasn't just a soldier, he was family. As Yunara says that his devotion was born out of trust and love, we see Jarvan IV walking away, likely to grieve the death of his uncle. I wish we had seen more of this in this comic, especially because the only story that Jarvan IV and Shin had together is no longer canon. The king asks how it happened, and Yunara tells only half of the truth, that Shin died fighting a demon. She says that the Demacians prefer to use that word, which is referencing how Yunara uses terms like Akana or Azakana instead. Then the conversation shifted from his death to the man himself. Yunara mentions how Shin liked to spend his time in the library, and then we get this very funny panel of Shin with glasses. Both agree that Shin loved knowledge and truth. I believe this was also hinted at in a previous comic. When Shin was having a dark vision, the evil version of the king mentioned how he was seeking knowledge about the spirit blossom flowers, which ended up being one of the reasons he returned to Ionia. I wonder if this part is also hinting that Yunara could be seeking knowledge about the aspects of Twilight in this library. Shin's room was by the gardens of the palace. They reminded him of Ionia. Last year, in LeBlanc's story, one of her clones crossed paths with him in these very same gardens. The king asks about Shin's body, and again Yunara only gives part of the truth. When the battle was over, there was nothing left. To herself she says that Shin's body was sundered, a reference to Zahen's title, The Unsundered. The king says the burden of his death is not hers alone, and invites her to get to know the city that he loved. She obviously feels guilty as she couldn't help Shin in his final moments, and technically she was also the one that convinced Canon to let Shin help the Kinku. She hopes that Zahen proves worthy of Shin's sacrifice, for he gave everything he had and everything he was for it. Here we can see the tip of his spear, but also his Demacian armor. Not the one he had in Ionia, no, I believe this is a reference to the armor he had before his rework. And that was it for Yunara's short comic. As I said, I'm not expecting this season to have any major reveals, so I don't mind the fact that nothing major really happened here. And I'm also expecting more than 2 comics this season, so I assume that's why this one feels smaller than usual. With this being said, we still have no idea what the beasts from the cinematic were. And on top of this, since we do have a rough idea about the rest of the lore that's coming, coming, check out this video to learn more. I don't know when we are going to see a follow-up to this comic right here. In my reaction to the cinematic, I did say that I was surprised they were actually doing something with Yunara so soon. Riot usually abandons storylines for years at a time, but maybe that will still happen with Yunara anyway, just after this comic instead of after the previous year. This might be the last time we are seeing Yunara in a while. I really hope that's not the case, but we'll have to wait and see. I know some people are really tired of Yunara because she was very present last year, but to be honest, I felt like she was underutilized, in the sense that she really didn't do anything, and honestly you could very easily remove her from the story without much changing, which is a shame. So I do hope Riot does something interesting with her in the future. For example, exploring the thread left by this voice line. Let me know your thoughts on the comic down below and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next video.